a few years ago because they were complaining they had no water. And I was driving up, and you'll see all of this incredible land, but it's absolutely bone dry.
There's no water. You don't get water. It's ridiculous.
America and Ontario are running out of water. 26% of the United States faces drought conditions, while Ontario holds 21% of the world's surface fresh water. Now that water is being pumped south, sold off, bottled, and shipped across the border. Families in Ontario are already under boil water advisories. Wells are running dry. And if you think this won't reach your town, your grocery store, or your tap, you're wrong. What happens when food prices rise because farms can't irrigate? When homes lose water pressure in the middle of summer? When entire towns go dry and no one steps in to help? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand this isn't just their problem. It's yours too. The Great Lakes Betrayal. A massive water pipeline is being built just beyond the Ontario border. Not by Queen's Park, not by Ottawa, by the state of Illinois. This pipeline will draw millions of gallons from Lake Michigan, rerouting them into 6 thirsty suburban communities that are facing total aquifer collapse within a decade. On paper, it's a solution for American towns, but in practice, it's a strategic shift that could destabilize water access for Canadian cities from Windsor to Toronto. And no one in Ontario was consulted. The Great Lakes Compact was supposed to be a safeguard. Instead, it has become a loophole system, designed and dominated by U.S. state governments. Legal rulings like the Waukesha decision have steadily chipped away at Canadian influence. Each new pipeline, each new out-of-basin exception, brings Ontario one step closer to losing control of its most vital resource. David Chen, a regional flow analyst overseeing binational water data, says it plainly. The compact doesn't protect Canada the way people think. It was built to manage American needs first. In Windsor, families are already seeing the consequences. Cross-border schools, binational jobs, and shared municipal infrastructure depend on coordinated water flows, not unilateral redirection. This isn't just political anymore, said Maria Santos, whose family straddles both sides of the border. It feels physical, like something essential is being taken away. What appears to be minor coordination today could become full dependency tomorrow. And as Ontario's water systems decay, those quiet dependencies become risks with continental consequences. But before we go any further, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing. Numbers don't lie. What does it take to drain 1/5 of the planet's surface fresh water without anyone noticing? Dr. Sarah Mitchell studies the slow, deliberate disappearance of the Great Lakes. These 5 lakes hold 21% of the world's surface fresh water. Yet each year they replenish less than 1% of their total volume. That reality means every withdrawal counts and every miscalculation adds up. Today, 4 of the 5 lakes sit below their long-term monthly averages. Lake Superior has not been this low since the year 2013. Lakes Michigan and Huron now reflect depths last seen in the year 2014. Lake Ontario's level mirrors that of the year 2003. Only Erie clings to historic norms, and just barely. The laws of physics don't negotiate, says Dr. Mitchell. If you remove more water than nature adds, you get decline. Combine that with increased evaporation from warming temperatures, and decline becomes collapse. Tom Richardson, who manages the Sarnia Marina, has adapted docks and launches constantly over the past 5 years. Once reliable boat access now sits idle. What used to be a seasonal adjustment has become a permanent struggle. I've been here nearly 2 decades, Tom says. This isn't just fluctuation. This is the system shifting underneath us. That shift affects more than marinas. Farmers across southwestern Ontario are seeing wells run dry during key growth months. Irrigation systems built on historical water tables now fail during peak demand. Families with century-old farms are reconsidering everything, from crops to careers. Janet Morrison stands by a well her grandfather drilled in the 1920s. Now it produces half its expected output. My father thought backup systems would be enough. They're not. We're drilling deeper and getting less. The consequences extend beyond agriculture. Shipping routes must adjust to shallower waters. Hydroelectric output decreases. Municipalities scramble to modify intake systems. Meanwhile, climate forecasts show not steady decline, but increased unpredictability. Ontario's future may swing between floods and droughts, with infrastructure unable to adapt to either. Amid that volatility, the pressure from the South continues to build. We analyzed international agreements most lawyers never read, interviewed engineers whose expertise rarely reaches public attention, and traced cause and effect relationships that span decades. You just discovered why Ontario cannot protect itself alone, and what that means for 10 million residents. If this investigation revealed realities that official statements obscure, subscribe. We're uncovering truths that power prefers to keep hidden. The 52 billion question. Ontario's water infrastructure is breaking faster than any government can repair it. And that was true even before American interest grew bolder. Jennifer Walsh, a municipal engineer, studies repair reports that resemble risk assessments more than maintenance schedules. Across the province, deferred upgrades now total 52 billion Canadian dollars for drinking water and wastewater systems combined. The backlog grows faster than budgets can keep pace. This is no longer maintenance, she says. It's triage. We fix what fails, cross our fingers, and keep moving. Sewers designed for a smaller population and milder weather now regularly overflow during storms. When rainfall intensity increases, as it now does nearly every season, untreated water floods lakes, rivers, and homes. The systems were built for a world that no longer exists. Mayor Robert Kim sees the pressure firsthand. His community must choose between upgrading water pipes or fixing roads, funding transit or subsidizing housing. No matter what the choice, something urgent gets left behind. Voters want low taxes and safe drinking water, he explains. That's not sustainable. For residents like Linda Chen, the collapse is already personal. After her Mississauga home flooded during a storm, her insurance company refused to pay. The city blamed infrastructure. The insurer blamed the city. Linda was left with a ruined basement and no accountability. It wasn't just rain, she says. It was failure, system failure. Thousands of Ontarians face similar dilemmas. The pipes are old. The weather is extreme. The budgets are tight. The math no longer works. Behind the scenes, engineering studies warn that without immediate large-scale investment, key systems will collapse under load. But no single term of office can solve a century of decay. Politicians defer, taxpayers resist, and the crisis deepens. And just as Ontario begins to buckle under its own failing infrastructure, a far more urgent problem is arriving from the South, where entire regions facing collapse are preparing to stake their future on the very water Ontario cannot protect. Record dry. Southern California just endured its driest water year start since the year 1981. For Maria Rodriguez, who oversees water conservation in Los Angeles, the charts on her office walls no longer show setbacks. They show crisis. Reservoirs remain low, aquifers drop, and every measure on the conservation list has already been deployed. Greywater systems, recycled water, drought landscaping, desalination. We've tried it all, Rodriguez says. It's not enough. As of May 2025, over 1/4 of the United States experiences drought. Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and California now consume more water annually than they gain. Groundwater drawn over centuries is vanishing. Carlos Mendoza farms in California's Central Valley. His grandfather grew almonds. His father switched to grapes. Carlos now plants squash Less water, less profit. We used to manage scarcity, he says. Now we survive it. The Colorado River, once the region's life source, can no longer meet its legal promises. Lakes Mead and Powell sit at just 1/3 capacity. Municipalities issue fines for lawn watering, while agriculture faces forced cutbacks. Citizens adapt, politicians stall. But the physics do not care. Across the Southwest, pressure builds, not to conserve, but to import. And that is when the idea of looking north re-emerges. The large faucet. It started as applause. Then it became a strategy. During a rally in California, President Donald Trump joked about a large faucet in British Columbia. Most Canadians laughed it off. Within weeks of his inauguration, however, federal staff in Ottawa were reviewing international water law. Rebecca Chen, with Canada's International Water Office, recalls the shift. It went from rhetoric to real policy review overnight. Southwestern states were already battling over their shrinking shares of the Colorado River. Arizona and Nevada had accepted cuts. California resisted, calling agriculture a matter of national security. Political pressure mounted to secure new water. Anywhere. British Columbia Premier David Eby issued a stern response. British Columbia's water belongs to British Columbians. The U.S. barely noticed. Canada's activists, however, took it seriously. Maud Barlow, who has fought water exports for decades, called Trump's push the most serious threat to Canadian water sovereignty in modern history. They're not asking anymore, she said. They're calculating. Trade disputes offered leverage. Washington signaled that Canadian water might be included in negotiations. Meanwhile, engineering firms began preparing pipeline blueprints. Some estimated large-scale transfers could be operating within a decade. Most Canadians opposed water exports. Polls showed. But few understood how easily trade pressure could shift policy. The idea that seemed unthinkable became part of real policy debate, right as scientists confirmed the American Southwest's losses were permanent. Death by degrees. Rain is no longer enough. In fact, even a wet year cannot save the Southwest. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a climate researcher at the University of California, explains it simply. For every degree of warming, we lose more water through evaporation than extra rainfall can replace. Her projections show that even generous precipitation years end in deficits. Dr. James Park, an economist, charts the economic shock. Reduced water means declining agriculture, higher food costs, and mass job losses across sectors. Cities lose investment. Rural towns empty. Prices rise. On her family's Central Valley farm, Susan Mitchell has already adapted. Half our land is now solar panels, she says. Water's too expensive. Electricity pays better. Municipal systems are collapsing under new pressures. Phoenix and Las Vegas invest billions in desalination and wastewater recycling. It helps, but does not close the gap. Housing prices fall where water is scarce. Insurance companies rewrite policies to exclude water damage from failing municipal systems. Federal planners now discuss options once politically off-limits: forced water sharing, interstate transfers, crop reductions, even population relocation. None of it is enough. The water simply is not there. Canada, however, still has it, and that makes all the difference. Death by degrees. Rain is no longer enough. In fact, even a wet year cannot save the Southwest. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a climate researcher at the University of California, explains it simply. For every degree of warming, we lose more water through evaporation than extra rainfall can replace. Her projections show that even generous precipitation years end in deficits. Dr. James Park, an economist, charts the economic shock. Reduced water means declining agriculture, higher food costs, and mass job losses across sectors. Cities lose investment. Rural towns empty. Prices rise. On her family's Central Valley farm, Susan Mitchell has already adapted. Half our land is now solar panels, she says. Water's too expensive. Electricity pays better. Municipal systems are collapsing under new pressures. Phoenix and Las Vegas invest billions in desalination and wastewater recycling. It helps, but does not close the gap. Housing prices fall where water is scarce. Insurance companies rewrite policies to exclude water damage from failing municipal systems. Federal planners now discuss options once politically off-limits: forced water sharing, interstate transfers, crop reductions, even population relocation. None of it is enough. The water simply is not there. Canada, however, still has it. And that makes all the difference. 3.5 million liters. What began with bottled water revealed something far more alarming. In Wellington County, Nestlé once drew up to 3.5 million liters per day from local aquifers. They called it bottled water. Locals called it theft. It was our water, says Councillor Mike Broomhead. They just took it and sold it back to us. By 2025, public backlash had forced Nestlé to sell the operation to Blue Triton. Yet similar permits exist across Ontario. Dozens of communities face the same reality: large-scale water removal with little recourse. Autumn Pelletier, an Indigenous youth activist, calls bottled water a form of modern colonialism. For her, selling water from Indigenous territory is not economic development. It is erasure. Hydrogeologist Dr. Patricia Morrison studies how many of these small extractions combine into large consequences. One permit seems fine. Dozens together permanently lower the water table, she warns. Ontario's aquifers produce water of exceptional purity, requiring little treatment. To corporations and policymakers in drought-stricken U.S. states, they are strategic assets. Every successful bottling operation becomes proof of concept for something bigger. Yet opposition continues. Local groups rally, councils push back. Legal battles slow expansion. Still, American water executives monitor Canadian resistance carefully. Not to stop, but to prepare. They are not interested in just 3.5 million liters. They want 300 times that amount, flowing continuously, directly, and indefinitely. And so bottled water became something else, the quiet rehearsal for a very loud future, silencing science. Nicole Rice arrived at work on a Tuesday morning in February to find her badge deactivated. After 10 years with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, she had been promoted to Communications Coordinator at the Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory. That promotion, ironically, placed her on probation, making her vulnerable when the Trump administration began firing federal scientists en masse. "I packed up field sensors nobody else knew how to use," Rice recalled. The people tracking algae blooms, invasive species, and ecosystem threats were let go, just gone. The lab she worked in had informed water safety for both countries for decades. Its models predicted toxic algae events before they could poison municipal drinking supplies. Its research improved responses to shoreline contamination. Without it, cities across 8 American states and 2 Canadian provinces lost their scientific anchor. Dr. Michael Bratton was next. His predictive tools helped anticipate phosphorus spikes that fuel algae growth. Now defunded, the alerts stopped coming. When you eliminate the monitoring, Bratton warned, you eliminate public protection. Canadian communities, although not targeted directly, felt the shockwaves. Data that Canadian municipalities relied on was no longer shared. Research vessels stayed docked. Monitoring buoys were left to drift without calibration or maintenance. University researchers relying on long-term data series found their projects collapsing. Municipal water managers suddenly had no federal guidance. Emergency protocols developed through years of cooperation were rendered ineffective. Science had been the quiet backbone of binational water management. Its removal left both countries blind, just as climate change made the lakes more volatile. Behind the budget cuts was a deeper strategy. Political leaders were not just ending programs. They were preparing to renegotiate water from a position of leverage, water on the table. For over 100 years, the Boundary Waters Treaty protected Canada and the United States from water disputes. Suddenly, those protections felt paper-thin. Rob Sisson, a Republican and former member of the International Joint Commission, had worked during Donald Trump's first term. He now watched the commission unravel. These agreements only work when both sides want them to, he said. Once one side sees water as a bargaining chip, cooperation collapses. In February of the year 2025, the New York Times reported that President Trump told Prime Minister Justin Trudeau the United States might revisit lake and river sharing. It was a veiled threat and a realignment. International law expert Dr. Jennifer Walsh said the meaning was clear. Treaties are not enforceable if one party refuses to participate. When water becomes scarce, even agreements with century-long legacies can dissolve. Canada continued honoring its obligations, but American agencies withdrew. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement remained on paper, but no longer in practice. Joint policy reviews were canceled. Working groups fell silent. Dr. Sarah Kim, a climate policy scholar, called it inevitable. Water treaties assumed abundance, she said. Now that scarcity is real, cooperation looks optional. Parallel negotiations over the Columbia River Treaty also fell apart. Premier David Eby's firm stance against exports only hardened American resolve. Business leaders on both sides worried about instability. Cross-border industries needed predictability. What they got instead was silence and uncertainty. The paper treaties remained, but the handshake that had made them work was gone. Water on the table. For over 100 years, the Boundary Waters Treaty protected Canada and the United States from water disputes. Suddenly, those protections felt paper-thin. Rob Sisson, a Republican and former member of the International Joint Commission, had worked during Donald Trump's first term. He now watched the commission unravel. These agreements only work when both sides want them to, he said. Once one side sees water as a bargaining chip, cooperation collapses. In February of the year 2025, the New York Times reported that President Trump told Prime Minister Justin Trudeau the United States might revisit lake and river sharing. It was a veiled threat and a realignment. International law expert Dr. Jennifer Walsh said the meaning was clear. Treaties are not enforceable if one party refuses to participate. When water becomes scarce, even agreements with century-long legacies can dissolve. Canada continued honoring its obligations, but American agencies withdrew. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement remained on paper, but no longer in practice. Joint policy reviews were canceled. Working groups fell silent. Dr. Sarah Kim, a climate policy scholar, called it inevitable. Water treaties assumed abundance, she said. Now that scarcity is real, cooperation looks optional. Parallel negotiations over the Columbia River Treaty also fell apart. Premier David Eby's firm stance against exports only hardened American resolve. Business leaders on both sides worried about instability. Cross-border industries needed predictability. What they got instead was silence and uncertainty. The paper treaties remained, but the handshake that had made them work was gone. Converging pressures. It was not one crisis. It was several, arriving all at once, merging into something no previous plan accounted for. Rachel Morrison, Emergency Management Ontario Coordinator, watches 5 crisis alerts blink across her screen. Each would warrant full mobilization on its own. Together, they form a storm Ontario's protocols were never designed to weather. Indigenous communities remain under long-term boil water advisories as drought looms. 52 billion Canadian dollars in infrastructure repairs go unmet. Great Lakes levels drop while American political pressure intensifies. diplomatic coordination collapses. And the climate is shifting faster than systems can adapt. Each issue has a solution in isolation, Morrison says, but they're not happening in isolation anymore. Indigenous water advocate Sharon Beargrease coordinates emergency water delivery in her community. For us, water insecurity is not theoretical. It's daily, she explains. Now the rest of Ontario is starting to feel it too. Southern Ontario faces a hotter than usual summer. Crops may fail, wells may dry. Cities will push aging systems past their limits. Dr. Kevin Thompson at the University of Toronto models cascading failures, how small breakdowns, when combined, turn into full collapse. Politicians face impossible trade-offs. Addressing one threat starves another. Municipalities choose between rebuilding pipes and safeguarding water rights. Provincial leaders must weigh treaty obligations against emergency relief. With no money, no margin, and no agreement on priorities, communities across Ontario brace for the storm, hoping resilience can replace what cooperation no longer provides. International law's limits. Laws give comfort until the moment they do not. Constitutional lawyer Dr. Michelle Chen reviews the Great Lakes Compact with growing concern. It doesn't block U.S. access, she says. It regulates it in language that sounds protective but isn't. Under the compact, either nation can approve in-basin diversions. Pipelines within the basin? Legal. Bottling under 20 liters per container? Also legal. Lawyer James Park works with Ontario towns. Federal agreements override municipal protections, he explains. Local votes may oppose water extraction, but international treaties, like the North American Free Trade Agreement, treat water as a tradable good once export begins. If Canada allows bulk water sales, even once, future restrictions could be considered illegal under trade law. Legal experts warn that a single pipeline or large export deal could establish irreversible precedent. Municipalities try to block permits, only to face corporate legal teams invoking international investor protections. Provincial bylaws collapse in court. Federal-level trade obligations dominate every challenge. Sarah Kim, a lawyer focused on economic coercion, calls this silent compliance. You don't need to break a treaty, she says. You reinterpret it behind closed doors. Then politicians say everything's fine, even when it's not. Arbitration panels favor trade over environment. Canadian courts must weigh sovereignty against foreign investment claims. In nearly every case, economic access wins. So while citizens march and mayors oppose exports, the agreements in place quietly enable what voters oppose, giving American companies legal routes to Canadian water without ever tearing up a treaty. The cost of starting over. Could Ontario survive without the United States? Dr. Robert Martinez, an infrastructure economist, doubts it. He calculates that achieving full independence in water systems, power capacity, and manufacturing would cost more than 470 billion Canadian dollars. You'd need 30 years to build what already exists through integration, he says. Municipalities know this. City Manager David Kim sees it in budgets. Joint U.S.-Canada systems save millions. Emergency response, shared monitoring, and infrastructure cost sharing reduce pressure. Duplicating all of it isn't feasible, Kim explains. Even if it were, residents wouldn't tolerate the service cuts required to fund it. Maria Santos, an engineering consultant, agrees. Binational systems are not easily separated. Reworking them mid-crisis would mean water disruptions, contamination risks, and massive economic losses. The human capital problem compounds the cost. Experts in Great Lakes water systems are trained across both countries. Replacing their networks, academic, technical, and professional, would take decades. Meanwhile, businesses rely on binational logistics and labor. Manufacturing and agriculture use shared supply chains. Economic Development Officer Lisa Thompson says companies would simply leave rather than navigate isolation. They don't want sovereignty, she says. They want certainty. So the math does not work. The timeline does not work. The politics do not work. Ontario's interdependence was not a weakness until the threat of separation made it one. And that leaves only one question. If Ontario cannot cut ties, what happens when it no longer controls the terms? No turn-off valve. There is no valve, no switch, no lock, no wall. The Great Lakes do not recognize borders, and neither does the crisis. Water systems engineer Patricia Kim explains the blunt truth. People ask, why not just stop American use? The answer is simple: we can't. The Great Lakes are an integrated ecosystem. Every withdrawal on either side affects the whole. Ontario's water quality depends on Michigan's sewage treatment. Buffalo's stormwater policies impact Toronto's beaches. Every node is connected. Dr. Michael Roberts maps these links in his climate modeling lab. The more variable the climate becomes, the more these connections matter, he says. You cannot manage one part without managing all of it. Indigenous waterkeeper Maria Loon frames it through traditional knowledge. Water doesn't obey treaties. It flows. So what's your take? Can local communities protect themselves when water systems ignore borders? Drop your thoughts below, and thanks for staying with this investigation that affects us all.